my dear brothers in the ordained ministry, my dear brothers and sisters in Christ, dear members and leaders of the Couples for Christ, magandang hapon po sa inyong lahat.
Magandang hapon, Bishop.
Allow me to greet you all with the love of the Lord. Some time ago, a little child asked me a question that really took me aback. The question was this: Bishop, did Jesus ever get sick? What would you have answered the child if the question were posed to you? And my answer, without batting an eyelash, was, but of course, my dear child, but of course. Yes, he was every bit human like you and me, in all ways and all things except sin. It does not say except sickness. Sickness included. I am sure sometimes Jesus also felt sick once in a while. Well, our first reading from the letter to the Hebrews indicates that we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who has similarly been tested in every way, yet without sin. So, let us confidently approach the throne of grace to receive mercy and to find grace for timely help. You know, I am talking about sickness because I have just been sick myself for the past few days. I almost did not make it for this afternoon's Eucharistic celebration. I was really very badly hit by a flu, so I have been down for the past 5 days now. And yesterday afternoon, I said, God, please raise me up so that I can at least celebrate Mass for the Couples for Christ. Well, as you can see, He raised me up. You know, whenever we visit a place, it is very normal for people to come and greet us, to greet the priest, to greet the bishop, and to kiss the hand of the bishop. When you are in a public place like this, one of the hazards is there is a strong tendency for you to pick up all sorts of viruses, especially during this time of cold. And you know that we're all very prone to all kinds of viral infections. Somebody said, Bishop, why don't you just tell people not to touch you anymore? Because you are too prone to illness. And why don't you just bring with yourself a disinfectant all the time so that at each time somebody kisses your hand, you disinfect them? I said, oh my God, I will never do that. I said, they might think, ang selan-selan naman ang bishop na yan. He doesn't want to be touched. And he's always afraid to pick up a virus. You know, in the time of Jesus, they were already very conscious of infections, of contagion. And they made no distinction between physical and spiritual diseases. As far as they were concerned, both diseases were very, very contagious. And in fact, they thought that one was always related to another. That our own physical diseases are often caused by spiritual diseases. They would usually speak of illness as a possession by unclean spirits. If you have been living an unclean life, you will be possessed by unclean spirits. And so because they knew that diseases, whether physical or spiritual, were very contagious, the normal approach to illness was avoid. To avoid sickness, you have to avoid the sick. But let me ask you the question, how can you avoid the sick if you are a doctor or a nurse? How can you avoid the sick if the sick is your child? If the sick is your spouse? If the sick one is your friend? You cannot just avoid. Even if you have to take good care of your health, if you love somebody, if you love the people who are entrusted to your care, you will not avoid them when they are sick with you. You would look after them. You would take care of them. Well, today's gospel speaks about Pharisees whose only principle was, if you want to avoid being infected by sin, then you have to avoid the sinners, period. And among the sinners were tax collectors and prostitutes and people who were considered as unclean and who were not allowed to enter the temple. Jesus was doing the exactly opposite approach of the Pharisees towards disease, towards sin. He was not avoiding them. He was in fact reaching out to them. Do you remember that time when Jesus met a leper? And my usual question is, bakit sila nagtagpo? Why did they meet? Because normally, the lepers themselves would be avoiding people. The lepers were outcasts. They were made to live in cemeteries, in places that were far from people. And you're supposed to shout even from far away, unclean, unclean, I am sick, I am diseased, please don't approach me. Why don't you just please throw me a piece of bread? That was the common condition of the lepers. Lepers were always seen in places of solitude because they lived a life of negative solitude, the solitude of isolation. Well, that explains why he met Jesus. Because Jesus was also a man of solitude, except that the solitude that Jesus lived was not a solitude of isolation, but a solitude of communion. Nagtagpo. The encounter between two people of solitude leads to something wonderful and miraculous. Jesus touched the leper. He was supposed to avoid him. No, he did not avoid him. He touched him. He touched the leper in the same way that he touched the lives of sinners and prostitutes. He touched people who were avoided by society. Of course, you would understand the reaction, the disgust of people. They would say, yuck. He is not avoiding them. He's not afraid. Is he not afraid of the contagious disease of sin? Baka mahawa siya. And Jesus touched the leper, and instantly the leper was cured. You know what I call that? I call it the reverse contagion. Totoo, nakakahawa ang sakit. Yes, it is true. Sin, like disease, is contagious. Evil is contagious. There is no doubt about that. That is why some people are called people of bad influence. And if you're not so sure of yourself yet, you better avoid them because you might get bad influence. But you know, the good news that is being proclaimed today is If evil is contagious, don't you forget that the good is even more contagious. I call this the reverse contagion. It is the touch of compassion and that reverses the contagion. That is why our first reading has reason to say, we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weakness. God did not avoid us at all. He reached out to us and allowed himself to be born in our wretched human condition, to share in our vulnerability, to share in our weaknesses. He was also tempted like all of us, except without sin, says the writer to the Hebrews. The touch of this man of solitude lifts up the man of solitude who is suffering from the solitude of isolation. He leads him from isolation to communion. We too are called, like Christ, to be bringers, to be bearers of grace. And Jesus, when he heard the attitude of the tax collector, said, it is those who are well, or those who are well do not need a doctor, rather the sick do. I have come to call not the righteous, but the sinners. My dear brothers and sisters, allow me to address very quickly your theme for this year, which I understand you are drawing from the second chapter of the Gospel of John, the story of the miracle at Cana. Obey and witness. I have been seeing your name tags everywhere with the slogan, obey and witness. There is, of course, a little bit of a shift in imagery. The crisis situation that is being addressed in the Gospel of John, in the story of the miracle at Cana, is not about sickness, it's not about disease, but rather an even more common experience, a situation of lack, a situation of inadequacy. What I call in Tagalog, isang kalagayan ng pagkaubos. I call it the running out of wine syndrome. Ang pagkaubos ng alak. The running out of wine experience is a very common experience. It is as common as burnout. It is as common as brownout or blackout, the spiritual brownout or the spiritual blackout. Wine in the Gospel of John is a very significant metaphor. It is a beautiful analogy for Christian life. Tayo ay alak, like the wine that we offer at the Eucharist. Wine is an analogy for Christian life as against water. Because compared to water, wine is a spirited drink. We all became wine when we were baptized. We were transformed from water into wine at baptism when we received the Holy Spirit. We were empowered to live our lives no longer as mere sons and daughters of man and woman. We were transformed to live our lives as sons and daughters of God, to live a life of the Spirit, a spirited life. This is what Christian life is really all about. Isang buhay na may lasa, a tasteful life as against a tasteless life. a life with purpose, a life with meaning, a life with direction, a life with mission. What good is life if it has no mission? Not all people who look alive are really alive. Some only look alive. Some people look alive, but they're good as dead if they live their life without meaning, without purpose, without direction. And so Christian life is a call to live a spirited life, a tasteful life, the life of being wine from bland water. We have been transformed already at the moment of our baptism. But then again, we're like those couple in the story of Cana. Well, they think that life is an eternal celebration until, of course, one day you discover that you have run out of wine. Have you ever experienced running out of the Spirit? Dear brothers and sisters, think about it. Every faith worker, every true disciple, every now and then will experience this crisis. We all go through this difficulty of waking up one day and realizing that we are running out of the Spirit, that we have become bland like water. We do not experience that spirited life that we used to live. And so what are we supposed to do? Anong gagawin natin when we go through this crisis experience? I think that is what you are preoccupied with your theme for this year, obey and witness. Obey and witness. When you run out of wine, don't despair. Just make sure you have your two most important guests in your wedding feast. And the most important wedding guests are Mama Mary and her son, Jesus. We have Mary pictured in the Gospel of John as a whispering woman. It is so obvious. When you hear about a whispering woman, you're supposed to be reminded of that woman in Genesis who whispered. Her whisper was a whisper of selfishness, and it brought about sin and isolation from God. Now this woman is the new Eve. Her whisper is a whisper of compassion. It is a whisper that will lead to a miracle. I once was told that one of the songs of the Beatles about Mary. You remember that song, "When I Find Myself in Times of Trouble, Mother Mary comes to me, whispers words of wisdom, let it be." And I was so fond of that song, believing indeed that they had written about Mama Mary, only to discover later on that they had written about Mary Jane. Marijuana pala yung tinutukoy, no? I wish they had really written about Mary. Because, indeed, that is what we Filipinos do in times of trouble. We come to Mama Mary, and she speaks words of wisdom. She whispers to us the whisper of compassion. Like the typical mother that she is, she's the first to notice a situation of crisis. At siya ang bumubulong, the whisper of compassion. I do not know if you've ever heard that French story, which is the exact opposite of the story of the miracle of Cana. Well, once upon a time, we're told, there was a couple that decided to get married. And they were so poor that the neighbors came to them and said, "We will help you with a feast." But the couple also had a pride. So the couple said, "Oh no, please. We have saved some money for this wedding. Yes, we will take care of the banquet. But if you would like to help us, please bring each family a jar of wine." And during those ancient times, people produced wine in their own cellars. And all the neighbors said, "Oh, that's easy. Okay, we will all bring 1 jar of wine per family." Now, the problem was, there was one wise neighbor who whispered to his neighbor and said, "Well, if hundreds of families will bring a jar of wine and put them all together in a barrel, I might as well just bring a jar of water. Nobody will notice anyway." And so he whispered it to his neighbor, and the neighbor whispered it to the other neighbor, and the other neighbor whispered it to the neighbor of the neighbor of the neighbor. And on the day of the wedding, when they toasted, "Cheers to the bride and the groom," the leader of the community said, "Long live the bride and the groom." And they lifted their cups, and then they drank their wine, and they were all red in shame because the wine had turned into water. It is the opposite. The opposite of the miracle of Cana. All because of one whispering man. It was a whisper of selfishness. That is how we reverse God's miracles. With selfishness, with sin, with egoism. Well, today, the Blessed Mother teaches us how to whisper rightly. Whisper the true words of wisdom. Whisper the whisper of compassion. And her whisper is, "Do whatever He asks of you." She will not even give the solution. She will just lead you to her Son. Do what He asks of you. And what is it that the Son will ask of us? Very simple. The Son will just say, "Fill up the empty jars. Fill up the empty jars." In all our emptiness, I know sometimes we may react to that. And we may say, "God, what do you ask me to fill up with?" Yun na nga ang problema. We have run out. And perhaps Jesus will say, "What is it that remains? What is it that you have?" And you'll probably say, "Nothing, Lord, nothing. There's nothing left but water. How can I serve water? It is bland and spiritless. I am nothing but water." Well, Jesus says, "Fill up with water." No problem about that. For as long as you can continue to fill up and to offer whatever it is that you have that is left, Jesus will say, "I will take care of the Spirit. Just give me your water, and I will touch your water and turn it into sweet wine so that people will say, 'But you have kept the good wine until now.'" Dear brothers and sisters, all we need to do is to obey. Obey what the Blessed Mother says. "Obey my Son. Do whatever He asks of you." That is all that He asks of us. That is all that she asks of us. And then you will see how He takes over. The gift is very simple. He will give us the gift of the Spirit. Allow Him always to touch you, to touch your life. And as long as you can still fill up, and incidentally, did you know what filling up in Filipino also means? Filling up in Filipino, pagpupuno, is our favorite cultural expression for forgiveness. Kapag may kulang, magpuno. When there is a lack, when there is an inadequacy, learn to fill up. Pag may kulang, wag nang mambutas. That is one of our most common problem, ang pambubutas sa isa't isa. Whatever it is that remains will disappear. We have to learn to fill up. Kapag tayo ay nagkasala, in Filipino we say, ikaw na sanang bahalang magpuno sa aking pagkukulang. And pagpupuno is also always an image of forgiveness. Part of obeying is learning how to be forgiving. Fill up. And after filling up, be ready to serve all over again. And the Lord will say, draw some of it out. Don't keep it. There is no use for life if we just preserve it. What are you going to do with bread if you don't break it and have it eaten and consumed? What are you going to do with wine if you just keep it? No. It is meant to be drunk. It is meant to be consumed. As our lives are meant to be consumed, draw some out and serve. Just continue serving. And then you will see. And then you will witness. Obey and witness. What do you witness? Taste and see that the Lord is good. Taste and see the sweetness of the Lord. A spirited life is a witness to the sweet Lord, to the Lord who is the source of all grace and mercy and compassion. And so you see, it is the same message. This afternoon, dear brothers and sisters, dear leaders of the Couples for Christ, my only exhortation for you is don't give up on each other. Don't give up on your brothers and sisters. Don't give up on one another, not even when they are sick. Don't give up on one another, not even when they fall short, not even when they run out of wine. I know every now and then you will hear conflicting voices. I know every now and then the whisper of Satan sounds much louder. No, listen only to the voice of compassion, the voice of the Blessed Mother, and listen to the voice of her Son. And when you hear that voice, follow that voice, obey that voice, and witness to that voice. Fill up and learn to draw out. Live always a life of service. Let people feel, let people see, and let people witness the power of God at work in your life. And don't you ever, ever again get intimidated by the contagion of evil. Like I said, yes, evil is contagious. But today we proclaim that if evil is contagious, the good is even much, much more contagious. Amen.